Hello everyone, I'm so excited for this year's Victober, and in this video I'm going to give you some ideas for what you can read in Victober if you want to participate in the month of October where everyone reads Victorian literature. I'm going to tell you what my plans are, maybe you'll want to follow along with me, and I'm going to give you some ideas for some other options if you don't want to choose the books that I'm selecting for Victober. Now, Victorian literature is the literature that was published during the reign of Victoria, which is from 1837 to 1901. I know a lot of people, they sometimes think that Jane Austen is a Victorian author. She's actually not. She's a Regency author. So some of the more famous Victorian authors are the Bronte sisters, George Eliot, Charles Dickens, Rudyard Kipling, Thomas Hardy, Elizabeth Gaskell. But I would say that probably the most famous Victorian author is Charles Dickens. And really sort of a lot of the themes that are in Victorian literature, they have to do with how humanity is grappling with these large machines, these rapidly changing world. You know, it focuses on social issues as well. So for me, one of the reasons why I am so excited for Victober this year is because randomly the books that I was already planning on reading next month, so this October, happened to be books that were Victorian literature. So the stars really aligned with me, especially because these books I'm planning on reading with a friend. I have a friend, we like to read classics together, and randomly we decided that we were going to read Dracula by Bram Stoker this month, and randomly Dracula is a Victorian book. It was originally published in 1878, and we all know what, Dracula is about. This one I actually purchased from bookshop.org. It's a special cover by the illustrator Ruben Toledo. And then randomly, another book that kind of the stars just aligned for Victober is Wuthering Heights. This is a beautiful copy of Wuthering Heights that I actually picked up from Shakespeare & Co. in Paris. Quickly ran in there because we were there for the Olympics, and then randomly it fits perfectly for Victober. So after my friend and I finish Dracula, we are going to move on to Wuthering Heights. So if you want to follow along with us, feel free. You can always comment, let me know where you are in terms of if you do decide to read these two books. I did start out with a book club here on this channel early on, but it just didn't really catch on, so I don't really do that anymore. But if you do want to follow along with me, let me know in the comments below. And then because I do love audiobooks as well, I am planning on reading Middlemarch. This is another Victorian-era novel by George Eliot, Middlemarch, and the reason why I'm going to listen to it is because I've heard that the narrator of this particular edition, Juliet Stevenson, she is quite good, so that's why I'm going to listen to that one. And Middlemarch, it's really just a story of the changing fortunes of a provincial community in England. The main character is Dorothea Brooks. She is an idealist. She gets involved in a marriage that doesn't really work, and there's a whole host of other characters as well. So those are my plans for Victober, but I want to give you some ideas if you don't want to follow along, or maybe you've already read the books that I'm going to read. So I did mention Charles Dickens as the most famous Victorian writer, and so here is my copy of Great Expectations, but you've got plenty to choose from if you want to choose Charles Dickens. You've got A Tale of Two Cities, you've got A Christmas Carol, you've got Oliver Twist, you've got Bleak House. He's obviously one of the most famous English language writers ever, so you've got plenty to choose from if you want to choose Charles Dickens. Now, another great Victorian-era book is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. What I really like about this book is, sometimes classics, they can kind of be a slog. They can be difficult to get through because of language. That's not how this is at all. This is the tale of a man who sells his soul to the devil for eternal youth. And sort of, it all has to surround this picture of him, a portrait where the portrait ages but he doesn't. Another really good Victorian-era writer that I like a lot is H.G. Wells. This book, The War of the Worlds, I was surprised by how much I really liked it. It was so imaginative. It was just so vivid. I was just kind of reading it because, I try to keep up on classics. I try to just read books that I didn't really ever get to in high school or college, which is really when a lot of us read a lot of these classics. And I was just kind of blown away by how much I enjoyed this, as well as just looking at it from almost like a scientific scientific perspective. This was published, I believe, in 1898, so just even understanding what, people actually knew back then in terms of science, it was a lot more than what I really thought. Now, another famous Victorian novel that you could choose is A Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Now, this one begins with the main character. He comes in contact with an eerie woman in white, and so begins what many people call, the first novel that combines gothic horror with psychological realism. Now, I mentioned Wuthering Heights, but you could also do Jane Eyre by one of the other Bronte sisters, Charlotte Bronte. So Jane Eyre is obviously, I'm sure most of us know the plot of that book. It is about a woman, Jane Eyre, and she grows up in the home of her aunt, a heartless aunt, and then she becomes a governess. And then she realizes there's some kind of terrible secrets that are happening in the house of Mr. Rochester, who she's also falling in love with. So yeah, that's a good one to pick if you've never read it. Now, another one to choose from is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So this novel is about a young woman, Margaret Hale, and basically she's living sort of this idealistic life in London, and then suddenly she no longer is able to live that life in London, and she has to go live in the north of England with her father, which is much more industrial than the south of England at that time. And she's sort of confronted with the dirt and the grime and the poor working conditions and the poverty. And I've never read this novel, but it's supposed to be a very nuanced novel as well, sort of trying to understand all of the perspectives of this rapidly changing age, this industrial revolution that, humanity had to experience, and sort of how they did it. So there you go. I hope you have some ideas now for what you can read during Victober. And again, if you want to follow along with me, read the books that I'm reading with my friend, please let me know.